All right, welcome back for day 2. Well, this is going to be a short day because we have the exam at 3 o'clock, and I'm going to give you guys a little break at the noon time to study for the exam. So if you're concerned about study time for the exam, I'm going to lecture till about noonish, and then after that you can have a lunch and study all the way up till 3. So you have at least 3 hours, hopefully, if I let you out by noon. But I will try and make it as close as possible. But I do have some finishing stuff to kind of go over. We have 3 projects we're going to go over, and we have about 4 lectures. So we're going to get all this done real quickly. They're very small stuff. In fact, this is the fun stuff. Gui Menus is the first topic, and then so what I'm going to do is lecture a little bit on Gui Menus as a concept, and then we'll look at the options menu. And then I'll go back and I'll lecture a little bit on dialogues, and then we'll have a dialogue a tutorial to do. And then I'll lecture a little bit on best practices in terms of Android. So the goal here is to create an application that supports options subcontext menus. This is the hardware feature of the phone when you press the menu button. And the simulator that I gave you for VirtualBox has one of these little round things that simulates the hardware on the phone. So we can simulate this on the VirtualBox emulators. You can also simulate it on the Android built-in emulators by hitting the menu button on the little interface that shows you kind of the fake hardware on the phone. So we have different types of menus: context menus, submenus, and options menus. And this is actually important to know for the final exam as well. So this is a little bit of more review for you. So there's 3 different types of menus. Creating an options menu that supports options, subs, and contexts. There's the main 2 part. The context menu comes up when you press your finger on the back of the on the phone itself or on the interface. It comes up and it's usually a box that looks like this. Actually, this is the context menu here, and then the options menu comes up when you press the hardware on the phone. And then this is what we're doing here. So we're going to build an options menu. Actually, we've already seen a context menu later, a couple weeks, probably during our second session. And then we have submenus that can come out of both context menus or options menus, depending upon what kind of menuing we've set up. So a submenu is just another menu that comes up from a menu item that we've selected. In this particular case, we're displaying here, display messages when a menu is clicked. So we could go plus, and then the plus menu would have 2 more menu options on it. So plus menu will also have open up a submenu itself as well. So menus can open up submenus, so that can open up submenus. There's no limit on how deep you can go. How many items can you fit on a menu? 6. Very good. If you do, then if you get 7, then you'll have 5 items plus a more button, and then the more takes you to the 6th item. So at one moment of time, you can have up to 6 items on a menu. Why did they do that? I don't know. Good question. I don't know why they fixed it that way, but we're limited to 6 items on a submenu. So here's the menu composition as we looked at it before. If we take a look at the options menu that shows up at the bottom of the screen here, the plus here is going to bring up to 2 submenu items. Up here we have a little text box, so long press here in the edit text is going to bring up this one here. So we can bring this up by the hardware. We can bring this up here, the options menu, by a long press or by any type of activity that we're going to check for. It's just a matter of showing the context menu or showing the options menu. So it's not restricted to just the hardware of the phone. We can bring it up at any one moment of time by using other events that occur, button clicks, long presses, stuff like that. So just keep that in mind as well. So up here, a long press here on the edit text will bring up this information here, which is going to be the context menu for the edit text. The context menu here happens to be showing up at the bottom of the screen. It doesn't necessarily have to show up at the top of the screen. We can fix the location of where it shows as well. So here's the code that we would use to create the Hello menu project if we were going to put one together. And we have this thing called menu.xml. Menu.xml actually shows up in the menu folder. By default, we don't actually get a menu folder unless we put one in. I've got a project open up here for an options menu. And the options menu, which is going to have problems. It was working a few minutes ago. What happened here? Well, that's really weird. Very odd, actually. That's interesting. Well, here's the menu here. My menuing system kind of went away. Kind of weird, actually. Doesn't look like I have folders like I have in this project here. Interesting. No, this one, no. Oh, you know what it is? I imported it in and then I removed it off my desktop. Let me try something here. I'm going to remove this here, delete it. Remove this one here as well. The two items that you're going to want to download today for what we're going to look at are going to be out here. Let me just show you where this is because I have to go get it myself. Is going to be, if we go into the Android phone application development and we go under the tutorial section, what I'll be showing you today is the options menu tutorial, options menu solution. So if I download the options menu solution here, we also have the options menu images if you're going to build it on your own. So the options menu solution, and then we have one that's called tabs, so tab tutorial and tab solution. So tabs is the other one we're going to look at. So I'm going to save both of these to the desktop. And I will just import them again actually. I had it all set up. Oh, actually I have them here. Options menu. Interesting. Let's just do this fresh. Here's my options menu. Tabs. So I'm going to import this into my Eclipse so I can show you. I'll just do the options menu right now. Much better. So now if I look in the resource folder of the options menu, I see a menu folder. The folder is not going to be there until I actually create an options menu. If I click on the main options menu that I'm using here, I can see I've got the XML interface for the bookmarks, save item, search, share. So what this is doing is it's essentially going to give me an options menu with items in it. And then in this particular case, I've actually added bookmarks, delete, preferences. There's going to be icons that are going to show up on there as well. This is the example we're going to go over in a few minutes. However, I wanted to point that out to you in terms of where everything gets stored. So you can create two views, text views, and in this particular case, if I were going to create this project here, I'd create two text views and then an edit text, and then create a menu. So in some cases in the old SDK, we actually had to create our own menu directory, old menu folder. I believe that is still the case now. It may be created for you automatically, however. When you go into the new Android XML file and you create something, you can actually create the menu, and we'll do this in a few minutes when we go through the tutorial. But when we create the menu to XML file, it gets located in the menu folder, and then we can create the context menu. Well, automatically now we get a context menu that's created for us with each new Android project. It never used to happen in the old days, but it does happen now. So we have a main XML, main activity XML for the interface, and then we have a context underscore menu XML that gets created for us. And we can see in the template of the onCreate method, we see both of them actually being created and used, which is kind of interesting. So they've changed it throughout the last couple of revisions of the templates. But here's what the menu XML file looks like. We define an options menu and a submenu in here, and we're just basically creating the code for the XML interface here. I showed you the graphical looking version of it. If I click on the XML button here for the menu, I see item, 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 opening and closing tags. So we're basically just creating the items themselves as single menu items. This one here doesn't have a submenu. This one just has basic items. And then each item has an image that's going to be associated with it. So it's going to show up images. In fact, if I run this one here, you can kind of see how this one is constructed here. It should run. There we go. So you see I don't really see anything except for when I have this little button down here, which is my options menu hardware, and if I press the menu, then I get this that shows up. So I have bookmark, share, search, and then here I don't really have any code, but if I click on one of the items, it's going to tell me which item was selected. So we'll build this in a few minutes, but it just kind of shows you, some of the things that you can do with an options menu. This is just spanning the width of the tablet interface, You can add icons to it. You can add sub-menus to it. So a lot of different things you can do to it, actually. So in here, what we've added is, in this particular example, there are no images. However, each one of the items here is on a single line instead of broken out. And there's a title, and there's also, you know, an item itself. So adding a title to it, and then adding the item text. And then there's a drawable home here. Actually, it is using images, it looks like here, on a couple of the items as well. So if I come up and take a look at the menu that's being created, yes, there are icons on here as well. So icons for home, plus, next, previous, the little arrows and things. You do have to be careful when you start selecting icons for this to make sure that they're going to be big enough to fit in there. And I've included the icon files for both of the two projects we'll be looking at. They're in the options menu images, which are the small little icons that are put in there. Some of them don't make sense, but they're just small temporary images that show up nicely. And then tab images as well. So you can download the images that are being used in there. But basically, in the context of this particular menu, I have the two outer menus, submenu 1, submenu 2, and then we have the items that show up in the submenus. And those are the items that are going to have drawable components here, icons and names and stuff on the menu. And then we pick the activity that's going to occur when the menu item is selected. So it's a great way of putting a menu item in to be used for selection of different features or different things you might have happen in the program. So here's the context menu itself as well, specified out with strings. So just the same way as you can use strings and you can use icons in the regular XML interface, you can do that as well with the context menu. And here's our strings file that would go along with this, that would define previous as PRE plus, next, home. And then our strings for our submenus and stuff as well. And then on the icons, we drag and drop the icons and we stick them in the drawable folders, and then we can able to use them just like we use them as resources in other parts of the program as well. So inflating a menu, option menu resource is the same as inflating the main interface file. Inflating the menu here, menu to XML, by adding the onCreate options menu in the main activity. So as we saw before in the default activity that we created, we have the inflating of the regular old activity main XML interface. Well, we do the same thing with the menu. But here's the inflator.inflator. So here's the code that you would use for onCreate options menu. Now the funny thing is it was currently added to a project template. So if I simply, let me just close this here. If I simply just create a new Android project, and I can do that within a couple of minutes here. I'll just call this one test. And I look at to see what I have created for me automatically. I see that the main activity is going to include the code for me by default. And in the previous examples in this course, I've been removing it because we haven't been using it. So it is definitely removable. However, at the same time, it's also usable. So if I look at the source code here, I go in and I take a look at the main activity file. What I'm going to see then is what I've got here. I've got the onCreate menu, onCreate of the app activity, and then I've got the onCreate options menu, which actually shows up as a separate method implementation, which is interesting. So this is where I'm getting the menu, get menu inflator, inflator. Well, they've changed it according to the slide over here, where we've made the menu inflator here inflator. Well, what have we done out here? Nothing. And by default, we actually get it. So the inflator is the menu. So inflates the menu, adds the items to the action bar. So if I come down here and I look at this default project in the menus here, I see I have an activity main, and then I have the main menu. So I can look over here and go, well, this one's activity main, and then this one's menu. So the menu here that would actually show up. Which is kind of interesting because this one's got a little problem with it, it looks like. It could be that it hasn't saved. Yeah. So once I save it, the red stuff goes away. So the default project should load eventually once the r.java file gets updated automatically here. So Anyway, so what they tried to do is in the default project, when you create it, they tried to automate it for you. In the old days, this never actually showed up, which was kind of interesting. So it does show up now, which is kind of a good thing. Or you could put it in manually if you have an older project, or if you remove it, you can put this code in there. It would work just fine for you as well. So you're just creating a menu inflator object, and you're inflating it just the same way as you're inflating the context for the main menu. So the response to user action, this is the interesting part here. So they give you the menu, but they don't give you the control for when you select items on the menu. So you can put in here on options item selected, which is going to be one method that you're going to implement that's going to respond to which item on the menu has been selected. So the response to the menu click events, you can override this by going on options item selected, and you would cut and paste and put this in there, and then this would essentially give you case switch kind of scenario here where it says, well, get the item, get item selected, and then if the item is the item plus, then do this, and then else, or not as an else, it's just a case here. Case menu item next, which is the name of the item. And you've tagged the name of the item up here when you created the item if you used this example here. And the ID here is going to be set for the item. In fact, this would be the ID that's associated with item home, menu item pre, menu item next, menu item plus, which is the ID that you've set. So you're looking at the ID and you're getting the menu ID. And you're saying, well, if it's this one, then put a little thing out here and it says, and we're going to do this in a few minutes. So it'll say plus button clicked, or next button clicked, or something of that nature, which is what we're doing in this example that we're going to run through in a few minutes. And we register the view for the context menu. So here we have the options on option item selected, which is going to be the functionality that's going to be performed when a menu item is selected. Then we have the menu item creation itself in the XML interface. And we call register for context menu. We don't actually have to do this anymore, but if we want it to for the main menu. You don't have to do anything for the hardware. That will automatically, the hardware button click will automatically trigger the options menu for you automatically. If you want it to go, in this particular case, on a text field, so when you press the text field it shows the option menu, this is the example for how you would do it. You would create a register for context menu and pass it to the view. So here an edit text, in this example is being used. So up here in this particular example, instead of showing the context menu with the menu button, which will show anyway, when you press in here, a long press in the edit text field is going to show up the options menu as well. And to do that, you just essentially register it. So with the view, edit text, receives a long press, it's going to display the context menu. So here we have a variable for the edit text, and then down here we just register for context menu. So we can register the context menu on any item we want on the GUI. So when we press on that item, we click the item, we do something to it, we're registering the event, it's going to open up the options menu. Why do we want that? Well, because we can have different options menus. We can have different context menus as well. So you can get different help. It's used for help systems, it's used for automating the entry of things. For example, if it said, a state, and you just pressed in there, and then you have a list, and you could select, CA or whatever state abbreviation from a list if you wanted to. Or you can use an option selection box or something of that nature. A lot of people don't know that they can actually press down on something and it's going to show something. So there's usually no instructions unless it says hold down the button. If you hold down the button long enough, you'll see a menu of options you can select from. So it's kind of UI design. You have to think about that in terms of the concept. But here we're just getting the menu out. We're just getting the edit text object itself, and we're just registering it for the context menu. And then we can define a context menu's appearance as well. We can change the look and feel of that by overriding the activities context menu, creating a callback method. So on create context menu, that's what we just saw a few minutes actually. We can override that method. So in here by default, we're not really overriding it. We're using we are overriding it, but we're not really doing anything with it. We're just loading it. But we could change it by changing the motif of the window, by changing some characteristic about it. here we can say, as an example, actually this is the same thing as before, we're just changing the menu to a different menu instead of using the default menu that was created for us. So, but you know, there's other things you can override in there. You can have it show up in different colors, have it show up in different location on the screen or something. So just know that you can override it. You can also define the context menu's behavior as well. So here's on our little thing here we've actually just did a few minutes ago. So overriding the on context item selected. So here we're putting up an adapter. So and the adapter is going to be called info, and it's going to basically be a menu adapter that's going to, I don't know, do something different. You know, show some different options, stuff like that. So. All right, so let's take a look at the tutorial for the context menu. I'm going to actually close this one here. This one's
so we don't have to add anything to the context menu in the layout, right?
not in the well, what do you mean?
In the layout with activity.xml, we have to mention menu items.
There's a separate, in the XML file, there's a separate context menu that's created. We're going to do it right now. So I'm going to close this one so I don't confuse it with what we're going to build in a few. Actually, I think I'll just leave it alone. So go ahead and download the PDF file that goes along with that one. For the options menu I just showed you on the bhacker.com website. And here I have it right here actually. So we're going to create one so you can kind of see how it's done. It's done differently. To answer your question, actually, again, it's not part of the main menu. It's not part of the XML interface. It's a separate file altogether. So it has nothing to do with the main menu, or it has nothing to do with the main interface. It's a separate component. You don't actually have to create it in XML at all either. You can hard code it, set it programmatically. I believe we're going to create an XML file in here, but let's see. So this tutorial, we're going to create a menu with 6 items on it, and then when we click on the items, it's going to set up a toast message. So we'll see how it's done. So create a new project by going File, New Android Project, and give it a name called Menus or something of that nature. So let's do that. Actually, let's see, New, File, New, Other, Android Application Project. I'm going to call this one My Menus. And I'll change the, I'll change this one here to edu, itu as the path. And go ahead and leave it alone in terms of all of the default settings, and use a blank activity for the main activity. We're going to get what we saw before, but yes, this one doesn't have as many problems as the previous example had in terms of all the red stuff. One of the interesting things I thought I would mention actually at this point is the reason why I deleted that other one that said text on here was because I already had in the workspace another project called text, because I always use test actually every time. And because of that, there was a conflict, and that's why that red errors were showing up on there, so I deleted it. Just use a unique name for the project, or delete it out of the workspace if you're going to recreate something with the same name. So, alright, so I've got my menu set up here, and so by default the system has created an XML file for me, and I've got it in the rest menu folder, and it's labeled menu.xml. So as mentioned before, if I open up the project here and I look at it, I've got a layout for the main activity, and then I've got a main menu that shows up. So this is what I'm getting by default. So I can use this one if I'd like and edit it, or I can create a new one and switch it around if I wanted to. I don't have to use this one. I can create a brand new one if I want to and put it in there as well. So we're going to open up the menu.xml file, and then we're going to type the following code in there. We're going to change the menu options around a little bit just to see how it's done. And each one of the menu items has an icon and some text associated with it. So you can download the icon files if you want and use those, or we can just set it for the main program icon if we wanted to do that as well. And what we're looking at here is just creating the menu items. So we can do it through cutting and pasting and putting in the information, or we could use the menu actually to do it. There is a Gui menu for it. We click on here and we go to the layout. And we do it here, we can add an item. And if we add an item, it would be a group, or would it be an item? If it's going to be an item, I'm going to call this one test. Oops. Add an item here. We can call this one item here test me or something, and then I can add the menu category. Well, it's going to be a main category because I don't have any subcategories, and I can put the icon in here and set all of the other information that I'd like on this as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut and paste and put this in here, get rid of what's in here, and just put in the menu items from this example here. And the menu items from this example are going to set up a nice little interface that's, at this point, it's going to have some bad icons on it because the icon files aren't going to show. But we'll see what happens when that's done. It's probably going to give me an error message. I'll have to take out the icons. But you can see it's a simple kind of way of automating it. So we have a bookmark here, menu bookmark. We're going to call it bookmark, and there's going to be a bookmark image here. And so what is going to end up happening here is now I'm going to need to go download those images if I'm going to do it. So I'm going to go to the options menu, images, and download those. And then I'm just going to drag them into the project so you can sort of see how that works. See, in here I just created some generic images, or really not. In fact, they don't even work with the same theme, but they work. So, and you really, just to refresh your memory, you really only have to put them into one directory. So I'm just going to come here, select them all. Hello. And drag them into this drawable directory here. Okay, let's do that again. Copy them in there. There we go. So copy them into one of your drawable directories, or create a generic one, call it drawable. And you see the errors went away, so now the images are there. So then if we take a look at this again, here we can copy the images in here, which is what I just did a few minutes ago. And then we can run the application and see the menu items actually appear. So your main activity should also be ready to be loading the images as well. And then in here, this is actually added for us by default because we use the default menu. So at this point, we can actually run it and see the menu, but nothing's going to happen. So if we run this program here, called My Menus. So let's see what we've got going on here. That's the other one, so I want to make sure I run the right one. My Menus. So we're going to see that the options menu is going to work for us automatically. And we see it shows up, but nothing's going to happen. When we press on something, nothing's going to happen for us because we need to add the code for that. So you can see how easy it is actually to change a menu, which is kind of interesting because people like stress over it. You say, put an options menu in there. And they go, oh, I don't know how to do it. It's actually done for you already. In fact, we just added some items to it, dropped some images in there, and now it's showing up for us automatically. Because this code is now added to the default project. And this code here is what we're looking at. And we're just using the default project information that came up for us. So if we take a look at the code, what we're doing is just taking advantage of this method right here. This method is creating in the options menu for us, getting the get menu inflator.inflate. And it's called main. So if we change this menu down here, we could change it we can add another menu in there. If we added another menu, we just basically, just come up here and go File, New, and then we could go XML File, or we can go Interface File, or we can just go File, and then select here from Menu File. Okay, well, and then we can select the different types of menu files that we'd want to create, and put a new menu file in there, and then change this name to the new file that we're going to create. And then add new items to it. And then what we could do is have multiple menus, and then when the person clicked on something, we can open up a new menu. So we can have like a dozen menus in there for each one of the options, and then when they pressed on each one of the controls, it loads up a different options menu. You see that all the time actually in applications. It's extremely easy to do. You just add a new menu into here. So then we're just going to keep with one menu. So we're going to add the code to make the menu items actually work. So in the following code is identified by its ID. So if you cut and paste it and use the code I just gave you a few minutes ago, you'll see that the items are marked. As an example, menu bookmark, we have a menu save, menu search, menu share. And what we're doing is just setting up a toast message when each one of these items is created. So if you want the toast messages to show, just cut and paste and put this code in here. And it's the entire method that we're overriding, which is going to be on the options menu selection. So if I copy this one and stick it in here, this is probably the easiest project to work with. Stick it underneath here, which is where you're going to normally find it. So you're going to normally find the, the code for the selected item on options menu selected. It's going to be right underneath the options menu item itself. And so here, this is going to be an interesting thing to fix because we have a different name being used in here, but we can import the menu item here, and we've got that one done. And so the alert message, I'm going to have definitely, it appears as definitely going to have some cut and pasting errors as it looks like here. So open up the solution and you'll see the corrected code. So if I leave this one alone and just open up the solution file, we can see the corrected code put in. Here it is. Without all the cut and paste errors that are going to happen with this. And then we'll see the toast messages being shown for each one of the items. So there's one or two ways of doing it. I would just download the solution file because it's not worth correcting the paste errors that are going to occur with that. But then you see essentially kind of a quick and easy way of designing a case switch structure to work with each one of the IDs. So this is automatically going to happen. We don't have to register we don't have to register a listener on the options menu. It just automatically shows up for us. And then when we do that, we end up with automatic on options item selected as a response to that. So that is how easy it is to install and to use an options menu. And knowing that the options menu is available to you provides you with a better user interface for the most part. So that was meant to be just a quick kind of introduction and look at the options menu. So let's take a look at some of the other menus. Let's remove this here. Now that my desktop is all messed up, let me go back here. So next on the agenda, and I'm going to just kind of pile all through this stuff because it's basically meant to be a kind of an overview and a look at it, is the concept of dialog boxes. We've seen alert boxes, we've seen toast messages. Toast messages and alerts aren't really dialogues because they're really just posting a piece of message out to you and they're not allowing you to respond to it. We can also create a system of dialogues where we've got buttons on it. The buttons can say yes, no, maybe. We can put buttons on the dialogues for us. We can also design it so it just has an OK button on it, as in this particular case here. They're commonly used for providing immediate information to the user. Same way as an options menu sort of does it, but an options menu is more of a menu. These are more of an alert or a information with, here's something, try again or cancel kind of thing. Often requires acknowledgement or feedback, where options menu just goes away if we don't touch it. In fact, we can put a timeout on the options menu so it does go away on the screen. So there's a lot of things you can do to customize that behavior. But in terms of dialog boxes, on the Android system, we have the dialog box that is treated as an activity, and it is an activity. So we can create a separate class that represents the dialog box. It's a separate activity that starts with a touch of a button or something, or some other activity it calls it. It's partially transparent, obscuring the activity behind, and it's floating, which means it shows up on top of the menu that is underneath it. So it's very common to see custom designed dialogues, which is really cool. You see them, they look like little windows that come up. In the window you can have like an entire PDF file, or you can have a form that you fill out. So it could be a registration form or something like that, and you fill it all out, and then you press OK on the form or something. Or it could just be simply informational. So dialogues are used to, sometimes people use the dialogues as separate windows in the application. And it does show up on top, so the current activity that's calling it doesn't go away, it just pauses. So we have the activity state that changes, and then on a resume from a pause, it can take the information from the dialog and do something with it, which is kind of functional. So there's 3 different types of dialogs. We have the dialog class. As I mentioned before, we can actually make a dialog class object. So it's an extension to support specific functionality. That's very useful. We have dialog themed activities. And then we have the toast. Already covered the toast message. We just looked at it a few minutes ago. But toast messages are a form of a dialog. It's an automated dialog. We don't normally put anything in the toast message or get any user response out of it. It's simply just a an informational thing. So we take a look at the dialog class. We have a key subclasses that come from this. Standard dialog has a title and an arbitrarily defined context view that's in XML. So we can have a dialog that has an XML file. So it's kind of like the main activity that has an XML main activity file associated with it. Well, we can create a dialog class and then have an XML file that loads with the dialog class, which gives us our model view controller kind of scenario. And then we can use that to communicate, the class to communicate with the XML interface. So the subclass includes alert dialog. Well, the alert dialog is the OK cancel, or just the OK, depending upon what we want to do out there. And then suggested as most appropriate for the use of most scenarios. So in fact, it's built in. We just create a new object called an alert dialog. We also have the text message plus one of the 3 feedback buttons that we might get on there. We can put checkboxes, radio buttons, arbitrarily input for text. Enter in your name, and then it enters in the name, gets the input. So you can put everything you can put on a main menu, you can put, or on a main screen, you can put in a dialog box. There's no limitation in terms of that. We have date time picker dialogs as well, which are extensions higher up in the hierarchy off the concept of the dialog. Progress dialogs as well. So they show us a status or progress reading. So the message in a progress bar as well. So interacting with your activity and the dialog box need to work together. One pauses, the other one runs. When the other one stops, the other one resumes automatically. So the activity supports directly on create dialog function. So you actually initialize or create the dialog with the on create dialog. And then on prepare dialog, which is optional, which means before you show the dialog, what are you going to do on prepare? Well, you're going to get something from the main activity, some screen. So let's say it's going to say, hey Barbara, put in your information, give me your password kind of thing. So you can take something from the main screen, send it, and you're going to use an on prepare if you're going to send information back. Called each time that the dialog is about to show to allow you the real-time management of the dialog. And then we have the show dialog function. So we have creating it, managing it, preparing it, and then showing it, and then removing it. So the life cycle of the dialog is broken out into those phases. So the show dialog function manages the process of showing it, including managing the on create dialog and the on prepare dialog for you. And the remove dialog completely gets rid of the dialog for you. So this all takes integers. So you map integers to the dialog, and I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes with some example code. But you should consider implementing the dialog interface, the on dismiss listener, which catches all the closing of the dialogs, and then also the dialog interface on cancel listener. So we have automatically when the dialog shows for the class is implementing interfaces through its inheritance that's going to give you all of the listener behavior. Because when we put a dialog up, it's naturally assumed that the user is going to click on something, or there's going to be a way of getting rid of dismissing the dialog or canceling the dialog. So the listeners put on this for us automatically, and much of this is changed in Honeycomb version using fragments instead. As we saw the fragments, actually we saw that yesterday actually with our maps. Yeah. So we still have the older way of doing it as well, however. But we can use the fragments on there and extend fragment activity, and fragment activity gives us a dialog that's we're using essentially for the maps that's going to show up. Yeah. Well, we did that yesterday. So the dialog boxes, we're going to build a standard dialog, construct the dialog providing a current activity as a parameter to the constructor. Because dialogs are associated with activities. So why do we have a dialog if we want them to do something? and we set the title with a string, and we set the context view to a view of an XML file or a resource, or we create one for the dialog. And then we manipulate any of the view components defined in the dialog interface through the dialog. And then we show the dialog. So here's a generic dialog that shows up. In fact, if you can see it down here on the bottom, show dialog A, show dialog B. When we click the button, we've got dialog B. This is the title of the dialog. This is the dialog. There's no buttons or anything in it, but we have a window that shows up. This is not a toast message. This is a dialog that was set up. So what we did here, we said we have dialog activity, extends activity, implements view on click listener. So we have the view on click listener for the buttons. And then we're going to have in here, we're going to have the on click to have a dialog, public dialog on create dialog. So then the dialog itself, which is the name of the objects class. So on create dialog, we're going to create this dialog, and the dialog is going to have d.set title, set context view, and it's going to be a dialog layout. So this is actually in an XML file that we've used, and here's the XML file actually up here. So the XML file is just basically showing this window here. A little bit overkill for what it's doing, but we could have it, you know, hey, show me this or show me that, have you read information. Could be a help menu actually, so the dialog shows up maybe on a long click or something like that. Register the event to show up, let's say for example, instead of an options menu, show the dialog or something of that nature, which you can actually do. So here's the on create dialog, and then we're just going to say, you know, if the dialog ID is A, if it's B, show up these windows here, and we're going to use dialog A layout, dialog B layout. So we have two different XML files that are going to show up in response, depending upon which dialog. And this is just one of them up here as an example. So that's how you're going to get it to show. You're going to register with an on-click event for something. How you're going to get it to show is completely up to you and your design of your application. But the idea is to create it using an XML file or do it programmatically. You don't necessarily need to load it from a resource. And then once it's up here, you have to figure out how to dismiss it. There's no button or anything on here. So you can show it for like 2 or 3 minutes and then dismiss it. Or put a button on there and then on the click of the button, dismiss it. So the dialog boxes, we have a dismiss and a cancel that's associated with it. So dismiss and cancel methods are called on the dialog boxes programmatically. Closes the box. So the dialog state is preserved even after these particular methods are called, so we can get the information from it. So once it's gone, we know that it showed. So, or we know that the user typed something into it, and then we can grab that and use it for something else. So the state itself is preserved and can be effectively cached. So if you called a remove dialog, via some dialog number ID that we gave the dialog, because it's a resource, we're going to give an ID, and then we dismiss it. We can remove the cache, we can remove everything with it if we want. So in terms of implementation, the dialog interface has an on dismiss listener and it has an on cancel listener as well that we can program in there to say that on this particular event do this, on that particular event do that, in terms of the method for dismissing it. So then we can trigger the on dismiss listener triggers a different method, or a different hook I should say. So the hook is to the dialog set on dismiss listener. So we can override this method here so that when it's dismissed, well, how's it dismissed? Well, when the user presses OK, or when the user does something else. Or maybe it's after a certain amount of time. So there are two separate methods that will be overridden if you want to. You can override one or you can override both. So on the cancel, you're triggering the cancel method. So it's a hardware back button as an example will trigger that. So anyway, those are the options you get. And again, this is just a brief kind of overview of the concept of the dialog. I've got a continuation of this in the next lecture here, number 18. Do you have a what? That's what I just showed you a few minutes ago. This is it right here, actually. This is an XML file called Dialog B.
Dialog component, it's just a text view, and the dialog is being added into a program.
It's a linear layout that's put with a text view inside of an XML file that's being called layout for the view that's going to be shown when the dialog is created.
The dialog is created programmatically.
No, it's created right here. On Create Dialog, you're going to show this view. You're going to get set the context view, so your answer is yes. You're setting the context view to this XML file. Same way as you show a menu, same way as you show the main view for the activity. The main layout, I should say. You don't have to do it this way, however. You can do this inside of Java source code. You don't have to use an XML file interface for the dialog. It's more common actually nowadays to see it done in Java than it is to be done this way. Beginners will do it this way because they're familiar with creating XML interfaces. So it's a little bit easier to, and then you can kind of see what the generic, in this particular case our generic dialog, you can kind of sort of see what it's going to look like in the edit tools for the UI. So, but you don't actually have to create this as a separate file. A lot of people will do this, however, if there's a lot of text, because then it separates it out, and then you're really using Model View Controller correctly. If you're not doing that, you're putting the view programmatically inside of the dialog function that's on the create. It's going to actually create the dialog for you. You don't really have a separation in terms of the Model View Controller design pattern. So this is more true to Model View Controller if you really want to follow the design pattern correctly. But completely optional. So in the dismiss and the cancel that we just looked at a few minutes ago, we'll go into a little bit more details in terms of what each one of them actually does. Dismiss and cancel, so there does not appear to be a simple way to get an ID associated with a dialog. You actually have to programmatically set it. So using a single onDismiss or onCancel method and differentiating between the dialogs inside of the method won't work without access to the ID to differentiate them. So in here we're giving it an ID in terms of when we run it. So we're setting the dialog, we're getting the dialog ID from the dialog that's being clicked on. So we can use that ID if we set a manual ID for it to differentiate between the two. Then we can use one method to switch between different dialogs. So you can employ an anonymous interclass listener associated with each dialog if you'd like to. Leads to some repetitive code. Or you can simply just give them IDs and then refer to them inside. So here's some sample code that was going to essentially show you how to do, and you can actually cut and paste this code and stick it in, create your own project that will systematically go through and create some dialogues for you and show you how to switch back and forth. So we have two buttons on here, one that shows dialog A, one that shows dialog B. We have two XML files that load up, one for each dialog. And then on the button clicks, we're going to show the dialogues, and then when those dialogues show up, we're going to register a text message in the text view. It says we have an on-cancel, an on-dismiss, an on-cancel to show you the activities that are going to occur for each one of the dialogues. Great way of figuring out and using the code together to sort of figure out, well, when are these activities occurring? So when the dialog shows and the dialog goes away, when the user is clicking on something. So this is a really nice, actually simple sample code that you can cut and paste and put into any project, actually. Kind of take a look at it. So this is what we're looking at in terms of a dialog box, and we know that a toast message is a variation of a dialog box. We also have the alert dialog as a separate subclass. So think of the dialog box as a higher component in the hierarchy, and then we have toast that's inherited from that, and then we have alert that's inherited from that as well. So we go down further down. Then we have different types of alert dialogs. Then we have different types of toasts. We have long toast, short toast, but those are different properties that we're associating with that object. So in the object hierarchy, dialog is generic. It's the highest one. And then that's when people go, well, what kind of dialogues do we have? Well, we have as many dialogues as you want, and then you can create your own dialogue. So a lot of people just subclass it, create their own special dialogue, and then use that dialogue over and over again, which makes a lot of sense, actually. If you don't want to make your own, you can use another built-in one. Here's the alert dialog. The alert dialog supports most standard dialog functionality, so it's textual information presented to the user. 1 to 3 buttons of feedback. Usually it's going to be an OK, cancel, or show me more, or something. And radio buttons, check boxes, everything is supported inside of it, text entry. So it employs the alert dialog builder to build the dialog. So the builder is going to Here is an example of the context view for it, or excuse me, the creation of the context view for it. A new dialog, alert dialog.builder with the context, which is going to be where am I going to build this and which screen hierarchy. So here's an example of some different ways and methods of using the alert to dialog. Commonly used methods are create it, set a message, set a title, set a positive button, set a neutral button, set a negative button, which are going to be like, okay, cancel, maybe, kind of thing. Or adding one to three buttons. I believe there is a limit on the number of buttons you can put on an alert dialog by the standard. You can also put a set cancelable on it, so you can close or ignore the button. Excuse me, put in an or a back button, allow or disallow a back button press, go back. I don't want to be in this dialog. So you can also put a listener on the items in the dialog box. So you can set the items itself in terms of an on-click listener, or you can set a single choice item for each one of them instead of just all of the buttons. So you can select between which one was selected, or this OK button was selected, or cancel button was selected. So the same choices you have with other button click and other listeners works. You can show a list of items to select from. You can show a radio button list. You can show a checkbox button list as well. You can set arbitrary view on the context for the dialog as well, such as an edit text. Actually, you can put anything you want on this little dialog box. It's kind of interesting. In fact, you can turn the dialog box into a main window. Make it big enough. It looks like a main window. The only thing different with a dialog box is that it opens up along with an activity. It's not a separate activity. So a lot of people get carried away with use of dialogs when they are afraid to use intents to load new activities or something, or they don't want to make a big activity, and then what ends up happening is you realize in the end you've just done a activity. So instead of inheriting from dialog, you can just go back to activity, and what you've done is essentially created a new activity for yourself, which is the same concept. So in terms of the alert dialog, we can set the positive button with a string. We can set the neutral button. We can set any of the attributes we want. We can actually put images on the buttons as well. We can also put images in the dialog. In terms of setting the on-click listener, requires implementation of on-click, just like any other button. So we have the dialog interface dialog, and then we initialize it with what button have we selected. And then we can put labels on it, so we can compare against button positive, neutral, or negative in terms of the button selections. And here's an example of some source code with some buttons. And here's our password dialog that showed up. It says enter your password and then submit or cancel. We have two buttons on here. And then this dialog came up with a login. So we have we're extending an on-click listener, obviously. We have a dialog interface.onClick listener because we need to also catch this one. So the on-click listener for the main activity is different than the on-click listener for the dialog. Dialog on-click listener is different because it's only looking for clicks that are on the dialog. So we have two separate listeners that we use for this. So in this particular case, we have a button that has an on-click listener. We have a dialog that has an on-click listener, which is why we inherited here from two different, we're implementing two different interfaces from on-click listener, and then we have dialog interface on-click listener, which is interesting because this is a view or model view controller. This is the dialog interface. So that's why we are subclassing. We have from two separate class hierarchies in here. So the reason why we've used this dot notation here is because how are we going to go on-click listener, comma, on-click listener? How do we know which ones? So this is actually required in terms of the syntax. Otherwise we don't know. So you have a lot of people that won't actually import view, but they'll do it this way. So a lot of the code you wonder, well, why in the world did they go view.onClick listener? It's because they're going to put something else in there too. They want to make sure they have both of them. So this code is pretty straightforward. There's a little text view, then there's a button in here. And the button says login on it. And then we're going to have a password here with a dialog 0. We're going to set an integer value, excuse me. And then on the create, we're going to create the main menu here. And then we're going to set the login button here. And then we're going to put the listener on the button. So it's a pretty simple interface. And then on the click of the button, we're going to show the dialog. So on click on click here, we're going to get the ID. We're going to set the button ID to 0 initially, and then show dialog. And so we're going to essentially show this password dialog on a show dialog. So show dialog is the method call that shows a dialog. So you can create an alert and then show the alert, or you can create a dialog, show the dialog, depending upon what level of the hierarchy you're in here. And then return from a checking password method that we're going to run. So we're going to call the check password method when the submit button is submitted. So on the on click, that's the code that's going to show the dialog, and then we have the dialog on create dialog that's going to populate the dialog menu. And here it's going to use a builder to builder set cancelable, set title, set message. So this is an example of setting it without using an XML file. So in the previous example we used an XML interface file for the dialog. This one we're setting it programmatically, and we're using the onCreate method to set it, which is one of the purposes of the onCreate. And so onCreate is going to set essentially all of the information that's in the dialog and actually create the dialog for us. And then when the user clicks on it, we're going to use the dialog on item selected, or on click listener is going to be used for, so the on click method is going to be used for when the on click method is going to submit. Is the ID the submit button, or is it the cancel button? And then we have the set positive button, set negative button, which is basically a left and a right button, and the neutral button's in the middle. So knowing the button order, knowing the specifics in terms of which properties you can set for the dialog is a matter of research, going online and going, I want to do an alert dialog, and then you know which properties are going to be associated with it. So
when is this onCreate dialog?
excuse me?
When is this onCreate dialog?
When the dialog is actually created. There's
Show
3
dialog.
phases.
Show dialog.
Yeah, show dialog. When the dialog is created, which is going to be created on an on-click listener that's going to capture the events that's occurring with the click of a button that says login on it. Then we're going to create the dialog. So on the show we have 3 methods that are enacted. Before you on create, and then the on show, and then we have the on cancel and dismiss. We have all of the different life cycle components of the dialog. So each one of those methods can be programmed separately. Usually before you do the on prepare, before you can either prepare it or create it. So on create is normally the one people are going to do for the showing of the information.
If you have more than 2 buttons,
You can have 3 by default, and then you can add custom buttons. What you're going to do is essentially inherit and create your own custom dialog and put as many buttons on there as you want.
so one,
By default you get 3, positive,
one it says
negative, and neutral.
positive, neutral.
You have 3 buttons, and it's per the location, positive, negative, and neutrals in the middle.
in the middle.
Yeah. Which is just the naming.
Mm-hmm.
In other dialogues you have OK and cancel, which is positive, negative. So in terms of the characteristic of the dialogue. So this is the standard alert dialog. People use it all the time. People get carried away with it. You can actually put an entire form in there if you wanted to. You can put as much information as you want in there. Progress dialog, hard to get creative with that one. It's basically going to show you a progress message, like a progress bar or stars or some sort of a status indicator is what's going to show up on the progress dialog. So it can show textual message or view and a progress indicator. So they call it a progress dialog. And the progress indicator is going to be indeterminate, maybe a circular spinner, maybe a style spinner, maybe a style horizontal for horizontal bar, which is going to be the component you're going to put on there. And then you have the context constructed within the context of the activity that's calling it. So here we have progress dialog. That's going to be a new progress dialog within the context. Well, it's going to be the activity. So you use a function called set progress style to choose which style you want. Let me just show you a picture of the sucker. I'm going to flip down to the bottom here. I believe there is a picture. So we have the counting. We have the, here it is. This is what I'm going to do. Progress bar. So we have the spinner. We have actually, the newer API has a couple more options in there too. Looks like the same ones you get for the iPhone actually on the progress indicator, progress bars. So we can set the style, And then in this particular case, we're going to look at the style spinner first, which is the round circle. And then we have the commonly used functions for set a message for the dialog box, set the employed style horizontal, set it vertical. How do you want the bar to appear? Also setting the maximum, setting the progress, setting the increments. So it's an integer, integer counting system. So the bar moves from left to right with integer counts of whole numbers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you can set the maximum, you can set the 50% point, so you can set the current status. So as something is working in the background, you might necessarily have, let's say for example, going back to yesterday's lecture, a thread that's downloading something or uploading something, and you can keep a counter with each, I don't know, 100 megabytes or something. It increments the counter, which is going to increment the progress bar. So you can use the information back and forth to show progress of something that's downloading or uploading, which makes it, again, for a user interface design, it makes it a little bit more pleasant to look at versus a blank screen that looks like it's canceled or something, or looks like it's frozen or something of that nature. So they're useful if you need to show status of two events, such as buffering progress and playing progress of a media track as an example. Secondary progress can be used, so you can set secondary progress with an integer value and increment the secondary progress as well. So you can show more than one. You can show two progresses on the bar. So here's an example of it. So we're going to use a dialog of interest, ID of interest. So we're going to have two of them. And if we have two of them, then what we can do then is set one to show status of something, increment it, and the other one's going to show status of another. And note the on prepare dialog and the remove dialog. Well, there's going to be an issue because, you know, what are you going to do with the counter value when it goes away? Are you going to reset it when the dialog shows back up again? Or are you going to keep track of that? So once the dialog goes away, so does the information associated with the dialog in this particular case. So, especially if you're updating a dialog with a counter and then you're using the counter to increment the dialog, you're using that kind of as a, and this one here is using a thread, by the way, because it's using runnable. So we know when we're using threads, we're extending runnable, we're using runnable, so creating a new runnable object. So here's our counting intermediate dialog. So this one's going to be counting. So if I call show dialog counting intermediate dialog, you get this to show this one. If you show the other one, you're going to get this one here. If you show counting progress dialog. So the code is the same between these two different screenshots. This one's going to be showing the intermediate dialog. This one's going to be showing the progress dialog, which is going to be showing you the, you know, kind of not really too clear versus kind of clear in terms of its status. So it's a matter of which presentation you want to do. You can have the option of setting either one, actually. Dialog themed activities. So activities can be themed to have different appearances to them. If you go to this link here, you can kind of see the style. We haven't used style very much in our previous examples, but we can theme the style. Supports things such as removing the title bars. Themes look like activities. They look like dialog boxes, actually. You can set the themes in the Android manifest file as well. So in our resource folder, we have style. In fact, newer projects have it. Let's take a look here, actually, to see if this one has it. So if I open up the resource folder here, don't have it. We can add a theme to it, and we have a style folder in the resource, and we add and it's going to give us different motif looking. We can have a menu bar on the top, remove the menu bar. What do we mean by that? Well, when we run the app, I think I probably still have something loaded here. See this little menu bar on the top? That's part of the theme, so we can get rid of that. In fact, we're going to do that in the next example. But we have a tabbed example. It's going to give us a slightly different manually created theme where we have a tab bar on the top and we click on different items in the tab bar. And it shows us different windows that come out of that. But the concept of themes is supported, and it's more used now than it is, or has been used in the past. But we can also set them in the manifest, or we can put them in a resource. So here's an example here of setting it in a manifest, actually. So you were setting the theme down here to theme dialog. So it's used a lot in the dialog dialog interfaces, I should say. So dialog boxes, dialog themed activities. There's an example here using an intent with an activity dialog example that's going to come out of here that's going to essentially create an intent to show the dialog. So we have our first activity and then we have our second activity down here, and we're just going to have one activity called the other activity of the intent, and the activity is going to be a dialog that we're going to show. So everything else with the activity stays the same, including the normal intent usage, but we have a different theme that's going to show. Alright, I'm going to move on to a different topic, but I think it's time for a break actually. Those of us who have been here at 9. So I'm going to break this, because I like to break every hour at least, so it's been an hour and a half. So let's take a short 10-minute break, and then I'll start in with measuring phone activities and some of the continuation of some of the sensor stuff that we'll look at. So.